Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, we're going to talk about modeling the law.
I'm Halvor Grizzly Bjørn. I'm a software developer. I live in Stavanger in Norway and work at NAV.
And I'm Chris Atherton. I'm a designer and content nerd. I live in the Oslo area. And we both work at the Norwegian Labour and Welfare Administration, which we call NAV, partly because that is such a long name, even in Norwegian. So, yeah, that's us. Thank you for coming. Bye. No. OK. We're going to...
Start with this, yes. I forgot to say that we're going to do this talk about saying I live with my partner. We don't have kids, but we do have 2 dogs. Like, that was part of my introduction.
This is a thing we often do in Norway, is you start a meeting with new people by saying, yes, I'm this many years old and I have 2 kids. And it's a very Norwegian thing to do. I don't have any dogs, so I'm just borrowing these dogs for today. OK, so what we're going to do is today, here's just an overview. We want to give you some background because we recognize that not everybody in the room is a specialist in Norwegian law. That's fine. For those of you who are not familiar with this, we'll sort of catch you up. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what it is to model the law, like what is the law, how might one model that. And we'll talk a little bit about some work that we've done, which we're here to show you, and how we modeled and then had to remodel a little bit. And we'll show you some of that. It's not finished. I just want to manage your expectations right now. This is not a prepackaged, ready-to-go piece of work. And we'll talk a little bit about what we learned. And we also talk briefly about business value, because we work for the state of Norway, so it's extremely important that this is taxpayers' money. And so they get value from any time that we spend doing any kind of development. It should be time well spent. It should be good value. OK, so the NAV is all about ensuring that people have... we try to get people back to work in Norway because we know it gives them a good social support network, among other things, and people feel valued when they can contribute in the workplace. But at the same time, there is this understanding that not everybody will be able to work. For some people, it's not realistic. And so for that, we want to give them good coverage. We want to make sure they have income so they can live and live well. And Norway is so enormously socialist and so inclusive that we use 1/3 of the state budget to do all this, to help people back into work or to give them money when they can't work to live on. And so things that are important for us are that when we build things for NAV, that this is happening quickly and reliably. So like we build, when I say services, we're delivering services. What I mean is things like application forms for people to apply for benefits, things like case working systems. So when we get the application, we can do something with it. And all of these require digital services, and so we want to be able to put those out quickly and effectively, because, again, it's important to be careful with taxpayers' money. It's very important that we are fair and that we are consistent in how we give people benefits. So if you qualify, and if we say, OK, you must meet these criteria, you must provide us with this information and fulfill these requirements, then we need to practice that evenly for everybody. It's really important that we are fair. And also, if you have a right to something, you should get it. It's very important for us that all citizens' rights are protected, that you should get what you can get if you have the need for it. And also, it's super important that we reduce organizational risk. So doing any of these badly, any of these other points, is not good. It exposes the organization to risk, which can be anything from like a legal challenge to just that we're not spending money effectively, that we're not doing our development work efficiently. And that is not good for us, so we try to reduce it. Halvor and I have worked on a thing, or Halvor Grizzly, or just Grizzly, if you like, have worked on a thing that is called work assessment allowance in English. We call it AP, or AAP, for short, arbeidsavklaringspenger, if you wondered. And this is a benefit to help people who have been long-term sick and who are still not able to work full-time to try and come back to work. The idea is that we'll help you gradually back if you can. Not everybody can, but we try. And Just to outline what we mean when someone is applying for this benefit. So first, what they do is they fill in an application form. Maybe they send some additional information, some attachments or whatever. This is then reviewed by caseworkers, so people whose job it is to consider the evidence and decide whether someone meets all these criteria. At the end of this, you get a judgment, which is, yes, you can have this benefit, or no, you can't have this benefit. If you can, then we have to look at how much you can get. Not everybody will get the same amount. And then you get a decision, which is yes or no, and then if you get a yes, then money will come. So that's the whole process. And we're developing this service as part of a huge modernization project. And the purpose of this project is to take this old case-working monolith and carve it up into new systems that do a better job, and avoid this old monolith. It's really important that when we're doing this, we build the right thing. So this is why we do this legal analysis that we're going to talk about. And also, it's super important when we do this that, we code everything like it was going to be automated. Some of this will never be automated. Some of this is about judgment for the caseworkers. Some of it is they have to consider all the evidence and make a decision that is not just yes or no. It's not based on necessarily objective facts. It's more like, here is this person's situation, their life, their health situation. Here we think of their prospects. And that's harder, so they need to use their own judgment. But everything we try and code is like, well, what if we could automate it? And that means that we need to be really specific. So when we talk about turning law into code, we have to be really sure what the law is, right? You have to be really sure to be able to turn it into code, really specific. And when we say, so I showed a slide before that said we provide those who require it with income. Well, how do we decide who requires it, right? There has to be a process. And unfortunately, or interestingly anyway, the law doesn't always specify absolutely everything down to every last piece of information. And this is good, actually, because it allows for more flexibility over time. So instead of having to change the law constantly because something or other needs to be changed, actually having a little bit of room for interpretation and intent allows practice to change a little flexibly and not have to update the law every 5 minutes. But this means that we need to produce some kind of interpretation. We need to look at what there is and say, okay, well, what do we think we should do? So I'm going to describe a cross-functional team, which is kind of cool. Actually, the cross-functional team would do this, doing a legal interpretation, and this is how we've done it. They look at, okay, what things does the law specify? And sometimes this is very clear and specific, other times not so much. And so you have to think about, well, what is the intent of the law here? If it doesn't say really clearly and unambiguously, where is it going? What is the purpose of this? And then you also have to look at which constraints exist. Perhaps this is the organization that does a thing in a certain way that has an effect on this benefit that means perhaps you can first get the benefit on this particular day, or other practice that is relevant for us. Perhaps there are court judgments, so perhaps someone has appealed, they didn't get ARPA, and perhaps they made a legal appeal to say, actually, I think I should have got it, and the court rules that, yes, you should have got ARPA. And so that can then require NAV to go back and look at our practice and say, well, okay, this court judgment means that in the future, we have to practice like this, we have to do it a little bit differently. And maybe there are other factors as well that we need to consider before landing on how we're actually going to interpret this particular piece of law. So we do it condition by condition. There are lots of conditions, as you'll see. We go through all these conditions and we say, okay, well, how do we interpret this condition? What do we need to be able to judge this condition, right? Like, which information do we actually need? And what will then be the logical flow from decision? So from decision to decision. So, for example, if we need to decide whether you're within the acceptable age range, so you can get ARPA from between 18 and 67 years of age. Okay, well, then the information we need is going to be your date of birth to calculate that, to see when you can get it. If we say yes, your date of birth is okay, what is the next condition? We have to know what the flow is from one judgment to the next. And obviously, if we look at your date of birth and say, no, that doesn't work for us, then there will have to be a different flow. So all of these things need to be considered by this team doing the analysis. And then we have another team, partly overlapping, who would do the information analysis, not quite so many people, not quite so cross-functional. And they would look at the results of this analysis, the legal analysis, and say, okay, well, what information do we need? And sometimes here it's possible to say, oh, we also need another piece of information that wasn't surfaced in the legal analysis. That's fine. That's the purpose of this. Otherwise, we inherit a lot of information from the other analysis. Okay, what format is this information in? Like date of birth is a date format. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Some other things are more complicated. Sometimes it's like some free text, a PDF. It depends. Where can we get this information? This can be all kinds of things, like maybe the person has filled out that information when they're applying for the benefit. Maybe we know because we pull from a register. The register can be internal in the organization. It can be from somewhere else in the Norwegian state. So it could be an API or lots of other things, or a manual lookup in another system for case working. Lots of possibilities. Excuse me. And then also we have to think about data quality. Which sources do we trust to get this information from? Sometimes there might be two places we could get a piece of information. Which of these is better? Why? So we need to also do the data quality consideration as well. And so what you find when doing this analysis is really the experience for the people who are doing this work to try and understand, okay, how do we go from law to code, is really only as good as the tools that they're using for any of this analysis. So let's talk about the experience for people doing this analysis and what that's like. Okay, so as those of you who don't read Norwegian might be wondering, like, what is this? I know 90% of people here are fine with reading Norwegian. It's actually very like Dutch. You'll be fine. For everyone except you and Danish people, this is the one chapter. So there is a whole work which is about benefits law for Norway, and this is one chapter. And this is the chapter that describes arbeidsavklaringspenger, so this benefit for people who have been ill or trying to get back into work. And it's quite a long chapter. It's like 31 paragraphs, and each paragraph is sort of several pieces of text. And each piece of text, this is just like down to the 12th one, but it goes on and on, you get the idea. Each, perhaps a sentence, or even less than a sentence, might define a particular condition that must be met. Some conditions take a whole paragraph to explain. And then there's kind of supplementary legislation as well, which is, this is a kind of a worked piece of legislation where this is how we as an organization have decided to interpret. This is a thing called a circular, rundskriv in Norwegian. And it describes kind of, okay, well, given this primary legislation, how do we translate this? And this only got down to paragraph 3 that I showed you now, so you get the idea that this is quite a lot of text to understand and work through and to write. Sometimes we also have these things called propositions, and this is where the organization or the department of government that we belong to has gone to Parliament and said, you know what, we think we should do this a little bit differently in the future. And so they've put forward this proposition to suggest how we could do it instead. So that you also have to consider this information when deciding how are we going to code this, because sometimes this is new. So the current interpretation might not consider this as well, and if we're going to act on this proposition, okay, well, we need to think about how do we fold that into our code. And then we start getting into documentation. So this is a Confluence slide. This is like one page from 30 pages of documentation, paragraph by paragraph. It's blurred partly because we're so far zoomed out, but full disclosure, it's also blurred because, I'm sorry, this is not for you to read right now. If you can read this, I'm very impressed. It's like on television where like there's a thing and someone points to the image and says, enhance. Try that with this, I dare you. So this is how we document. There's a really good thought-through process about how we document this analysis process, and it's done, among other things, in Confluence. And you make a table, and you have these particular, you set up these particular rows and so on, and you work through every single condition in every single paragraph in every single chapter that is relevant. It takes a while. Like I said, this is one of 30 pages with lots of big tables, lots of writing. It's not great to work in, honestly. You see, it's quite narrow columns. Like the size of a monitor that you're looking at, this is like a quarter of what's here, right? And then we also work in Excel to do the information analysis. And you can barely see this, right? This is like several pages of like just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling in Excel to detail what information we need and where it's coming from, or what our like how good quality we consider it to be. So these are not great systems for working in. It's what we have, it's what we trust, because they have to meet requirements like GDPR and all of these kind of privacy and data security rules. And it's fine, but when you're doing this analysis, you're like, this could be better. Sometimes we use Mural as well when we just like the spreadsheet kind of format or tables won't work, and we're kind of like, okay, well, let's reorganize this information so it makes sense. This is a great way to work, by the way. It also works really well with paper if you're in the same room. Just here's all the information, here are all the thoughts. Let's use our hands to move this around. It's good. It's a good way to work. However, you might notice that this is a little bit kind of cognitively overloading, that it's a lot of information, there's a lot of scrolling, there's a lot of changing between browser tabs. It's just hard. The work of the analysis for legal specialists and other people is demanding enough. So to also have to battle with the software is not great, we noticed. So the tools really don't support the process, right? Having to make your own tables is, like, why should a person who's a specialist have to make their own tables, right? There's no single source of the truth. This was one of the things that we thought, well, this is actually really hard, because if you've mentioned a thing several places, then you have to mention the thing several places. You have to describe it, if necessary, several places. Cross-linking is really limited. As you probably, if you've ever tried to cross-link things, you can kind of link to a subheader in Confluence, but you can't really easily link to a table cell. You can't preview it or anything. It's just hard. There's also a risk, obviously, that when you have links that are kind of just sort of free text with a URL that points somewhere, maybe that somewhere is it's not there anymore, or it's not what you wanted anymore. And there's just so much switching between all of these different sort of UIs and browser tabs. The other thing we really noticed was that, like, it's really hard to have a sense of progress. So the legal analysis, as you may be beginning to understand, takes a long time. It can take months, like actual months. You can't tell, like, without going into every single table and kind of reading every single page and going, oh, okay, here's where we got to. This is how far we got in this analysis. There's no good overview. And it makes it hard to kind of put all the things in one place and say, okay, well, we're like 1/3 of the way through, or we have 5 paragraphs that we really need someone to expedite to go faster because we need this information. And so we looked at this and we're like, well, this is kind of a structured content problem, right? Like, we need structured content. This is not that. A table does not count as structured content. But we also know, well, we've done this before. So maybe, like, should do something? Should try something anyway, right? I think especially, like, when we work in the public sector, it's like, if you have an idea for how things should be better, then really you should try and make it better, because it's so important that everything works. So we did a pilot. We did like, we asked for a little bit of money to just trial this for a pilot. We got 2.5 months, 1.2 people. Neither of us is the 0.2. It kind of, it was flexible a little bit. Is this, and the scope is only, will this work for AAP? So like, just can we make it work for this particular benefit? And how much value can we demonstrate in that time, actually, if we can make this work? So, developing the tool, in theory, right? We're going to sketch the model, so we're going to come with this kind of domain model of like the whole law, and then the chapter, and then the paragraphs, and then each paragraph has smaller parts, and these have information requirements associated with the condition, blah, blah, blah. Then we were going to code the model, and then we were going to show the model in the kind of the editorial UI. Halvor Grizzly will say a little bit more about that afterwards. And that was going to be great. We were going to test, we were going to adjust, we were going to lather, rinse, repeat, right, until, you know, this is how we do iterative design and build. So here's what actually happened. And it can be summarized as you're doing it wrong. Basically what we had done is we like rebuilt the structure of the law in the tool. So we had said, okay, well, here's this benefit, and it's composed of, for now, 1 chapter, and here is paragraph 1 or 2. 3, here is the text from those. So we kind of recreated the law, if you like, in this tool. And then we had a meeting with a developer, and the developer was like, yeah, no, that's not what you do. So he drew this sort of process domain. Instead, he drew like, this is how we actually work. And really, he was just sort of saying, well, the data domain is just a reference work. So in this drawing, we have like tolkning as interpretation here, and that's kind of in first place to the left. And then we have like the legal part down to the right, which is just like, yeah, this is your whole like chapter and conditions and everything like that. And we look at that, but like we're doing the interpretation. The center of this is that we sit and we do this interpretation by referring to different things. Those are like reference works. And then we go, okay, well, this is our decision about this, and these are the information, pieces of information that we need. And we were like, oh, right. And this is good, right? Because now we're in a kind of product development mindset. So now we're like, oh, okay, right. We need to change how we think about this. We understand now better what is the process that users need to go through. What do we need to build for them to do this process? So we went back to coding again. And we don't have a front end yet, by the way, in this, because we're still trying to make the, I don't mean like today, I mean like in this process, how I described it so far. We wanted to get the model a little bit more mature before we then would make a front end on it. Otherwise, we could spend a lot of time doing front end for it to be completely wrong. So we didn't want to do that. OK.
Yeah. So it's time to demo a little bit. It's this one. Yeah, we can see it. So we chose a tool called Sanity for doing this work. I'm just going to get my notes as well. We mostly chose Sanity because we knew how to build with it from earlier, like we've used it in other teams and like other projects. Like what we needed was a way to easily structure content and an easy way to query it later on as well. Hold on. Something popping up here. And I think anything that we have built here can also be achieved with any other kind of like database or backends or these kind of things. So what we're looking at here right now is we have the interpretations. They are called tolkning in Norwegian. We're going to create a new one. And we will start by looking up a paragraph. So that's this one. And you can also just go in and look at the paragraph. Like this is a paragraph that goes on age that we talked about earlier. And it says that the member needs to be between 18 and 67 years old. So we can just write that here. Like that's what we are interpreting. And usually we would spend like a lot of time writing a description of everything here. We will just write something. And we would also attach all of the other like legal sources, all these kind of things that we are referring to from other places. But I think what is more important is to create the rules. And as Chris mentioned, one rule here can be that you need to be at least 18 years of age. And for me as a developer, it's really important to know what does we mean by 18? Like, is it the day you turn 18? Is it the day after, the day before? What should happen if you apply before you are 18? So we need to be really specific. And then we also talked about like those information elements. So we have date of birth that I haven't created. So we can say like from this system that we have in Nav called PDL, which is just like the registry of all people in Norway, we want to get the property called date of birth. And we publish that. We have described that rule, and we can say something about this rule is from the day you are turning 18, like exactly. So it'd be, in code, it would be like checking equal or higher rather than something else. And then we can publish this one as well. And then we can sit in this cross-functional team. We can do like a lot of interpretation of all the different rules. When we are done, we can say this one is done, and we publish it. And then we should be able to find it in the front end. So this is something we quite quickly built using Sanity as well. Everything is based on queries and structured content. And here we can see that the interpretation we just did shows up here. We also have the paragraph on the left side, so we can easily see which part of law are we looking at right now.
Please forgive, by the way, that we didn't really have time to recode everything in English.
Yeah. So there is a lot of like Norwegian that you see here, but the Norwegian law is in Norwegian as well, so that's also part of our domain. But hopefully, like the model itself does not depend on the spoken language. I think that's it for the first part of the demo.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll leave it back to you.
Thank you. Okay. So this was like one judgment, right? Like the person needs to be between 18 and 67, right? That's from one sentence in one paragraph, in one section of like one chapter of Norwegian law, right? It's a lot. This is why it takes time, because you have to have this discussion, this cross-functional discussion where the legal people are like, well, here's all the evidence, and then you have to go with business architects or business analysts and developers. And what Halvor didn't, like, he was very modest, and what he didn't say was developers are really good at writing rules. But you should, because they are. So it was hard for it was harder for legal specialists and subject matter experts to boil it right down to, okay, well, what do we mean when we say 18? How do we formulate this? And that was a really nice thing about having developers and legal specialists and business analysts in the same room, was that together they could kind of go through this all together and arrive at this kind of taking it from up here and abstract to down here and really concrete and specific. But it takes time, right? Okay, so then we want to talk about, well, what happens when an interpretation is no longer valid? Because things change. So the law changes sometimes for all sorts of reasons. The law can change, like say tomorrow, for example, Norway decides that actually you can get this benefit from the age of 17 and not 18. Okay, so now we have to reconsider how we're going to do this. Sometimes the intent changes, like a government can come in and say, actually, we want fewer people to get this benefit, or actually, we want to be more generous and allow more people to get this benefit. So that, too, will have meaning for the work that we're doing here. Practice can change. So perhaps we, in the organization, there's a new register that we can get data from, or there's a different way of contacting users. So maybe we have this messaging system with doctors, for example, to get medical information, and maybe someone changes how that system works or brings in a new system. Now we get health information in a different way, so we also have to think, well, what is the format of that health information? Does it work well with the model that we have, or should we change it? And then sometimes someone will go to court and say, I don't agree with the fact that I can't get this benefit. I think it was a wrong judgment, and I want to challenge it. And again, if that happens, then perhaps, and the person wins in court, then perhaps we'll have to change how we do an interpretation. So what this means is that we have to be able to replace an old interpretation with a new one. We have to be able to document every change that is made, and we have to be really good about tracking versions. It's super important to know like what version is current at any time. And this is how, at the moment, we have been documenting current practice. So this is the table that I showed you before about that we use in Confluence for the analysis. And this particular column here is like just free text, is like plain text with, well, maybe some links in it about this is what we do today for this specific interpretation of this one tiny part of the law. This is what we do. And so we thought, well, okay, this is easy to model, right? Let's just make a text box, and we can just put all this text in. That's fine. And then we spoke with another developer, these pesky developers. They just keep telling us we're doing it wrong. And he said, yeah, but like current practice, isn't that just really today's interpretation? Like you've built this whole content or data model based on what you do. Like this is what you're building for the future. When we go live with this new system, then you've defined this data model for how we take the law and translate it into code. But like surely what we do today is just the same. Why can't you put current practice, never mind this big text box, why can't you put current practice into this model? But it's just today's interpretation and not tomorrow's for when we go live with a new system. And we were like, oh, yeah. So we're going to demo how we do that.
Yeah. I will not bore you by creating a lot of new interpretations again, but we can look at the one we just created. Because we have this field in the down that says this interpretation replaces other interpretation. So then we can just like find the previous one we made earlier. We just choose a random one. And then we can publish, and then like this new one that we have created is the current version. And I think if we go back to the front end, of course the model is not working completely, but
hard refresh, maybe.
Maybe a hard refresh. Maybe I also did something wrong. But then it should at least say like, this is the newest version. Like click here to go back to the previous one. And if you somehow have a direct link to the previous one, then you can also see information there saying like this one is deprecated. Please look at this new interpretation instead. And this backlinking works like all the way back, so you can create like a lot of iterations on this over the years. So if someone also complains to Nav in 3 years' time, saying, hey, I applied for this benefit 3 years ago, we can go back and look at how did we interpret the law at that specific point of time, which is quite neat for us. I think that's it.
Hmm? We wanted to say one more thing, which is really sort of the third part of this idea. And this is about querying structured content. So you said before that we were using Sanity, and Sanity has a very simple querying language where you can basically just say, go in and get me these things, and then show them in the front end. And you can define these queries quite specifically. When you have this content model, you just say, okay, we'll combine this, or filter that by, or show it in this order, or whatever. And this was really important for us, because when we were talking to legal specialists and developers and all of these people who need to use this, like, they have different needs. So not all users need to see all of the content all of the time. We don't have to just take absolutely everything and lift it out and show it to you, and then developers can find the information they need, and business analysts can find the information they need, and lawyers can find something else. So we wanted to understand, well, maybe like there's, again, back to the process domain, like what is your process here, and how can we build a front end that would reflect that? And so we needed to understand a little bit better what kind of tasks people have and how these differ depending on your role. So the business need is at any time, like you said, absolute clarity about what is or was true, because anyone might question a decision at any time. Sometimes we have to go through this like process of double checking the quality of the things that we're doing. So you need to understand what was true and when. A developer needs something different, perhaps. They need to understand the data model. They want to know, okay, well, what are the information sources? Where are we getting this stuff from? They need to understand the flow of rules. So we talked about building up rules about date of birth and so on, but they also need to understand, well, what is the flow from this decision to this decision to this decision, because that's going to have to go in the code somewhere. And also in the front end, it's going to have to be shown as well. So It's not just a kind of back end, this, but also we need to ensure that the front end is a good experience for the caseworker to say, okay, well, you've done that, now do this. And also we need to think about versioning, so important. And the product manager also needs something, and I mentioned this very briefly earlier, having a sense of progress in the analysis, having a sense of progress in terms of what is current now, what was current yesterday. It's so important to understand, particularly when you're in the middle of this analysis, which can take like weeks, maybe months. It's so important to understand and have an overview over, well, okay, what is done, what is not done, what is ready to code, and so on. And that's just completely, we felt that that was something that we were really missing today and wanted to see. So one last demo.
Yeah. So now we're just going to look at the information elements. So this is just like a different view of the same data, where we have listed out all of the various information elements that we have figured out we need in this analysis. And it also lists out like the sources of where we get those data from. So this is mostly just like an example of how we can write a really quick query, get another set of data, and present it in a very different way. That was very hard to do with the tools we had previously. And we can probably add more onto this by creating more filters and see like, oh, but like from this system, which interpretations rely on information that comes from this system? Like maybe this system needs to be replaced at some time. Then we can get an easy overview of that as well. Yes, that was the last part of the demo.
Okay, so time to talk about what we learned during this. A lot, 2.5 months, but also so much happened in that time. First, I think we managed to show that another world is possible, that it is actually, you can maybe think about this and use better tools, build better tools for this. And it's a nice privilege of working in technology where you look at a problem also internally in an organization and think, well, our tools are not very good. And I think that's much more a kind of software development mindset, is to look at this stuff and say, well, this is a terrible experience. Can't we have something better? And this is not to denigrate, like I don't want to talk badly about tools like Confluence and Excel. They're very good for what they are designed for. They were not designed to cope with this kind of task. That does not reflect badly on the people making them. It is just they're not for this. And so when we try to use the tools for this, we start to push against the boundaries of what's livable with. And so it was really nice to be able to say to people who are not used to thinking maybe in this way, who are just used to suffering nobly, that this is like, what if we did this a different way? And they were like, can we do that? Yeah, we can. And that's wonderful to be able to suggest, and it was very nice to be able to get someone to invest a little bit of money to try and pilot this. So what we hope we've shown for our users is that there is less extraneous cognitive load. So by extraneous cognitive load, I mean cognitive load imposed from outside that is not inherent, that is not based in the kind of the data domain or the process domain, but is added on top by having to cope with switching between browser windows or different software and scrolling while trying to remember what you were looking for, and this lack of cross-linking and everything else. So trying to reduce that, we felt that people, like you showed this page now, where you have lots of things in one place. You have the text of the law, and you have the interpretation, and you have like, okay, which information is required here, and the rules, and so on. Putting all of that in one place was really important to us to be able to do, and it went really well. The users really appreciated not having to switch all the time. We got good feedback about how this is a much better way of doing the analysis because you get everybody in the room, you get this cross-functional team, and instead of it being a little bit legal analysis and then cold information analysis after that, to be able to get the same people at the same time to talk about, okay, here's this requirement, here's how we think we're going to assess it, here's us turning it into rules, again, developers very good at that, and then just the kind of, that whole process happening in one place and being guided through that whole process in one place seemed to work quite well for people. Like, this is a very small sample. We can't say that this is like statistically significant or anything, but they were very enthusiastic about it. They liked it. This is just a kind of a screen grab. The little tag up there, klar til utvikling, it just means ready for development. And the process of being able to tag things, like you showed, this is like ready or this is deprecated or whatever, it means that we can make these nice summary pages. Very little development is required to make a front-end page that just uses querying to pull out the right information. And it means that a product manager can have like an overview over what's good, what's ready to go, what still needs more time, or we can have things that are deprecated on one page. We can do whatever we want, really. And so being able to show things that are not just the work, not just the text that is being written and the data, but also being able to show the kind of the process around that and how things are coming. And we're excited about that possibility as well. And like, this is kind of the core, right? Is that like, to meet user needs, you really, really need to understand the process domain. Like, we went into this and we were like, oh, look at this, the data domain. We've built this data domain. So beautiful. Here you go. We're ready to work. And actually, that's not the thing. Like, this can't work without the data domain, but the user experience ended up really being much more about the process. And we didn't understand that at the start, and we were made aware that this was a thing afterwards. And so the business value that we think this offers, I hope kind of it's evident already from what we've shown you. But just to recap, when we talked earlier about what is important for NAV, so we talked about being fair, being consistent. We talked about quick delivery of services and reliable delivery of services. We want to ensure that all citizens get what they have a right to get. And we want to try and reduce organizational risk. And so what you'll see is that a lot of these have in common single source of the truth and how important and useful that is. They have in common reduced cognitive load also, because we can deliver more quickly if people don't have to think about making a table and can just get to it. If we're helping you with this process by providing a good tool for the process, then that's efficient, and so we go quicker. It's really important, I forget if I said this earlier, but like, it's really important when we turn the law into code that we do it right, because 150,000 people a year, something like that, are getting this benefit. It's a lot of people, so if you do it wrong, then that's a lot of people who are going to potentially have a problem. So it's very important that everyone has a good overview of what's happening. It's very important that it's clear what we're doing, what the organization is actually doing, what is the truth at any given time. And we hope that we're helping with this. And a really nice thing was that when we showed this to people, also outside the immediate product area that we work in, they were like, oh, can we have this? Can we have this? Actually, would it do this? Could we have a thing where, and this was great, because it meant that people had like bought the idea. And it was very satisfying to be told, yeah, when can we start using this? This is really good. And there's a slightly sad answer to that, but we'll come there. But this for me, this is the kind of the validation that I want. That is like, this is real to people because they want it to do more things. They can see the purpose and they can imagine how it could be used for them. Things we never thought of, right? And of course, we couldn't deliver or prioritize everything. Not very many people, short period of time for the pilot. For example, the whole thing with the idea that you make a decision, and then based on the outcome of that decision, there's like a tree, there's a decision tree of like which conditions you have to decide. And everybody wanted this, almost from day one. Can we see this flow? Can we see, please, we need to be able to have the overview of everything to see this decision tree. And we have the data. Right? We showed you that we have all the data there, but turning it into a front-end UI that is livable, that like you can actually use, is more than we could do in this time, unfortunately. But we believe it's possible, but we couldn't prioritize it. We didn't get to the point of taking these circulars and breaking them down into the interpretation. If you remember, like one of the aha moments for us was that someone said, but today's practice is just, the same data model is just not represented like that today. And so this is one of those very long secondary legislation documents that explains how we practice this part of the law today. So we didn't get around to doing that spooging, which is just trying to jam this stuff into our data model because it's a big process. We really wanted to do a date picker because when you say this interpretation is valid until this point in time and then this one takes over, so when we deprecate old interpretations and go over to new ones, you should be able to choose the dates, right? But making a date picker is, you called it a quality of life improvement?
Among other things.
Among other things, yeah. We must have it, but making a date picker was not a priority when we were trying to show value. Everyone knows what a date picker is and how it works. So the idea is there, but the implementation we couldn't prioritize. And then we have these huge, big ideas, right? For example, what if we could take this data that is input, all of these interpretations and the information they need and so on, and make it public on the website? What if you could go to our website and see, to decide whether you can get this benefit, here are all the judgments we need to make, and for each judgment, here is all the information we can use. That would be cool. What about if we do that with the caseworking software? What about if this is just available to caseworkers at any time to just look at and go, oh, okay, for this, in this particular judgment I have to make, decision I have to make, here is the information. And if we change it in the back end, maybe it updates in the front end, right? It's really important, obviously, that you understand when you get a judgment, a decision about the benefit. So how nice would it be if we could just put this data straight in to the letter and say, or the message you get online and say, we have reviewed these conditions, we use this information to give you a decision. We don't want to overwhelm citizens, they want the money, they need the money, but it would be nice to be able to tell them how, if they wanted to know. And it's really important when they get a no decision, because then you need to understand, well, how did NAV get to this conclusion? What information was reviewed? What considerations were made? So it would be really good to be able to actually surface the data, to be able to tell them that, so they can consider, well, okay, that seems fair, or no, I disagree and I want to appeal. So what happens now? Well, we wait a little bit. You said this is government?
It's government, things take time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of process to everything.
Yeah. And so the organization has a budget, and by the time we've done this work, this year's budget is accounted for. We can't just pull the handbrake in the car and say, we have a better idea. There's a big plan about how we're going to spend all this money. So we can't just pivot like that, but we're talking about it in the organization and trying to get people to get on board with it.
Maybe we will be back next year.
Maybe we'll be back next year. Right. Oh, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you.